perspective, this is really a great opportunity for us to launch the Women in Grit, even beyond the borders of Mauritius. So we're really excited around this initiative. So from my side, most of you should know who I am. I'm the co-founder of Grit and the CEO. And it has really been some very, very unusual times for us, as we've seen in this market. And what's been unusual is the fact that all of us have really needed to adapt. We've needed to reinvent ourselves. Not only a lot of us are full-time employees or run our own businesses, but we're now teaching our children school. We've become experts at homeschooling. We're running our own households. We're cleaning, we're cooking, we're doing things that, including myself, that I'd never done pre-COVID. So for me, it was an interesting one for us when we started debating the fact of setting up this webinar, because I've seen so many webinars around from a commercial perspective. How do you survive COVID? What does the business world look like post-COVID? What is the macroeconomic landscape of the entire world look like post-COVID? But there has not been one webinar for me that has dealt with really the impact of women and the importance of women and the importance of us doing what we do and doing it so well in a very unprecedented time. So for us, this is, as I've mentioned, this is actually now our 8th event, Women in Grit. Just a reminder for everybody what Grit stands for and the name of the business. It's really defined by the guts, the resilience, the innovation, the tenacity. And this is something I live daily by, and something I know that my team of live daily by, and all the relationships that we have in the market. So we're really excited about setting this up. And from our side, Lindsay, who's going to be speaking today, was also, sometimes in life and doing a whole lot of mindfulness practices over this period, I've realized that sometimes the universe can be so beautifully aligned. And I got introduced to Lindsay when I was actually on a very different journey in my life. I have recently been going through a divorce, and I thought it would be an amazing opportunity to launch into 100 other things that would take my mind off the divorce, as we do. And one of them was that I'd registered and entered the London Marathon, which is what is going to be my first marathon. The interesting part is that I never got to run the marathon because of COVID, but I got to spend a considerable amount of time with Lindsay, and I can explain why. So in the midst of all of these changes happening in my life, one of the things that I was really focused on was exercise. My running is a form of meditation, and that came with health. And I thought, I'm looking for this person in Mauritius. Does the person exist? And I found Lindsay's website, which was really beautiful at the time. And I saw the word nutritionist, and I thought, fabulous. This is the person I'm looking for. And I'm going to go, and I'm going to tell her I'm running a marathon, and she's going to give me an amazing diet, which is going to make me faster and quicker to do this London Marathon. So I arrived at Lindsay, not realizing that Lindsay's approach is so much more multidimensional than just nutrition. And she'll obviously speak a little bit about it and what she's involved in. But the irony is that I never ended up running the London Marathon. It's been great to use Lindsay's techniques in the kitchen, because I have become fairly proficient in the kitchen, which is quite exciting. I never thought I would ever say that in my life. But what also happened is that Lindsay became an unbelievable source of mentorship, energy, just somebody that gave me a different perspective, not only through what I was going through the divorce, how to deal with my kids through this time, but the magnitude of COVID and what it meant for myself as an individual, for my team, for Mauritius itself, and for the business of Grit. And I ended up spending lots of time with Lindsay over this period. And as I said, the irony is I haven't run the marathon yet. So I still hope to run that marathon. So just to introduce you to Lindsay, and really she's not just any speaker that we found sort of, as a recommendation. I've personally spent probably 3 months with Lindsay on a weekly basis. So, the opportunity to have Lindsay speak to yourselves when I've spent so much amazing time is really quite exciting for me to be able to share actually this beautiful gift that I've been able to find through Lindsay. So just to give you, Lindsay used to be very much part of the corporate world. So she understands exactly what we're all going through, and the madness that we live in as women, trying to manage all the parameters of our life and dealing with the corporate world. And she moved from the pharmaceutical industry into being a nutrition and preventative, and doing nutrition and preventative health. and became a certified health coach. And Lindsay, you'll hear, is from the US, and she's got the most beautiful accent, and she's managed to keep that. She's founded a company called Health Up, which you'll see today. And as I said, my benefit of dealing with Health Up and Lindsay is that it's not just around eating, it's not just around diet. You know, what's in your head is often the biggest problem, and it's really a holistic approach to so many facets of your life. And I've become an extremely mindful person, actually working a lot with Lindsay. And I think surviving COVID and surviving what the new world is going to give us, we all need an element of mindfulness. We all need an element of meditation, self-control, all of these things. And I always joke with Lindsay, it doesn't necessarily come in a bottle of wine. You can actually do other things. And I do laugh because my sessions with Lindsay, I used to hide my wine behind when we used to do Zoom, and then eventually I just took it out and said, okay, I'm drinking wine while we're having our sessions. So there's been a lot of honesty and a lot of truth spoken. And Lindsay's also an EFT, which is an emotion freedom, does emotional freedom techniques. And basically from being a health and nutrition coach and the founder of Health Up, and just an amazing CV. And the fact that I love Lindsay is that she'll often say, you know, try this technique. I promise you, Bronwyn, it's not woo-woo. It's been proven of X, Y, Z. And I love that concept because a lot of us need to have some form of, you know, understanding that this is connected to reality. And then we like to practice mindfulness, where it's actually quite interesting. And Lindsay's very good at using that. So I think without further ado, Lindsay, I really would like to introduce you to the ladies that have been invited today. The pinnacle of grit and who we are is relationships. We've built our business on relationships. Africa is about relationships. Through some very stressful times over COVID, we've pulled on the relationships. And every lady that's been invited to this call from our side has a relationship with grit. And that's what makes our business unique, is that relationship, and not just the relationship with the people that we do business, but with our staff, with families. And that's really the culture of grit. And Lindsay, I'd like to introduce you to do this presentation to us, and we're really excited to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. And can I ask how many people, I cannot see how many people are actually on the call.
So we've got 42 participants.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So that's good. And all women, right? Because it is women with grit. I'm just checking.
Yes. And we often do have men that sneak onto these things. So I wouldn't be surprised, because we've had men sneak into our women events before, which we don't really mind. But mostly,
well, I mean, men can learn from this too. So that's for sure.
Correct. So yeah, it's mostly women, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for that brilliant introduction. And I must say, I've been very happy working with you as well. So it's just so beautiful to see the progression of people that come through. And usually, yeah, they come in with one goal and they come out with not only reaching that goal, but something else. So hopefully you will get to run that marathon. So great. So thanks, ladies, for joining. I know this is right in the middle of your day. So I'm aiming to give you some substance. And the idea is to leave with knowing how to be less guilty, or to feel less guilty, and to basically release all these negative emotions that you may carry and not even know it. And some of you know it, but are not sure how to release it. So we're going to work through all of that. And as you see, I've mentioned unapologetically aligned to your values. And I just need a caveat, and I hope there are no kids around, but I am not teaching anyone how to be a bitch. That's not the goal here. It is really just how to align to what you need to do, and do it in the right way, and do it with grace. Okay. So it's not going to let me change. So there we go. So grit, as Bronwyn defined, I think the acronyms for grit as the company, these are some of the words that also define grit, or are defined by grit. So courage, conscientiousness, perseverance, resilience, and passion. And these, I mean, grit is a little bit of an elusive term, but these are the terms that mostly encompass grit. And in order to have a life full of grit, we need to kind of focus on these and not have any of the heavy emotions that sometimes accompany these positive things that we're doing. Grit is the largest predictor of success. So, and you've probably seen that in writing or in TED Talks, but it really is a better predictor of success than IQ, talent, or social intelligence. So we want to harness these great feelings and not be weighed down by these negative emotions. And specifically, we're talking about guilt today, but you can't talk about guilt without talking about shame, because Guilt is, you know, I did something bad, or I'm doing something bad, or I'm doing something that I'm not comfortable with. And shame is I am bad. And oftentimes these two become intertwined. And they morph into one another. So for example, if we did something that makes us feel like a bad mom, already we've activated both guilt and shame. So what we're going to do today is talk about the sources of these types of feelings, just really understand them a bit first before we know how to release them. And I also don't just want to narrow it down to guilt and shame, although I will primarily focus on guilt. It's really all these negative emotions that are often accompanied with guilt and shame. So frustration, self-doubt, lack of belonging, lack of confidence, resentment. I cannot even see all my slides because of the screen. Depression, anger, unworthiness, regret, betrayal, powerlessness. These are all things that are often accompanied with it. And so what we want to do is understand where it's coming from, and then we can learn how to release it. All right, so the sources of guilt, this is, and as I mentioned, we're going to go through the sources first. We're going to go just how to recognize when guilt is knocking at your door, because oftentimes we suppress it, or we push it away, or we channel it into something that's not necessarily the healthiest route. So this is just to understand more. There are three sources of guilt. One is from you. So basically it's you do something, you feel guilty about it. And if you want to isolate it completely, others don't really care. Let's assume that you did something, others don't care, but you feel bad. That's guilt within you. Then you've got the guilt from others, which is basically if they actually didn't care, you'd have nothing to worry about. But more often than not, we are feeling guilty in some way, shape, or form because we are either letting someone else down or disappointing someone else. And this is a huge source of guilt, especially for women. And the last one, this is kind of a play on words because it's not really a source of guilt, but this is actually avoiding guilt. And so many times in our lives, we are doing things to avoid feeling guilty just because we don't want anyone else to feel bad. And understandably, because life is full of compromises, we cannot be completely selfish, understandably. But at the same time, many people, especially women, are encroaching upon their own happiness more than they need to. And that can actually inhibit the success and the happiness that we want to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to share some examples. Most of these you've felt in some way, shape, or form. Mistakes, so if you make a mistake, you may feel guilty. Canceling, you feel guilty. Being late, underperforming, or feeling like you just didn't do that perfect job, you'll feel guilty. Not spending enough time with kids, not healthy enough, binging, eating too much chocolate cake, all of these things will make us feel guilty. Sometimes people feel guilty for spending money. And yes, sometimes people even feel guilty for having too much fun, for being happy and being healthy, because not everyone is in, it has the privilege that we have in that moment or in that instance, and we feel guilty because of it. Guilt from others. So you may get side comments about your weight or how you raise kids, how you spend your time, multiple things. Maybe you have a partner that complains about the lack of attention or care. They may hint about it. Anytime we let others down, maybe someone gives us a subtle reminder of a mistake at work or at home, and that just sets in the guilt more, and they don't know that they're necessarily trying. Some people are trying because they want us to learn. Others don't realize it. They also want us to learn. We also get bad looks. So how many of you have been driving and then you did something that was borderline, or whether it was wrong or right, you got a dirty look, and that even made you feel guilty. So all these places where we feel guilty. And then where we avoid guilt is, or trade it for another emotion. Running the kids everywhere at the expense of being exhausted. So there are many moms who do this, many moms who do so many things to please others, many women in general, and I'll come to women. Saying yes to everything, never canceling, pleasing partner just to check the box. These are things where we're trying to avoid feeling guilty instead of addressing the real issue. Now, Bronwyn, if you want to chime in at any point, feel free. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to mention those. But of course, at the end, you'll also have an opportunity to ask some questions. Okay, so where did it come from? And before I share this next picture, the idea And it may not seem like that at first, but the idea is to not make you feel more guilty by looking at some of these slides. But this picture may have that feeling, but the thing I want to remind you is, or may elicit that feeling, but the thing I want to remind you is that we need to be aware in order to fix the problem. So as you can see, the way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice. And often we have become more guilty because of the way our parents have talked to us. And not only our parents, our teachers, the culture, the society, that type of upbringing. So we learn to self-criticize, and there's all these experiences that kind of cultivate that feeling. We live in a highly competitive society, so our sense of self-worth becomes tied to how well we're doing compared to others. Women empathize and internalize more. So actually, if you look at brain scans of men versus women, you'll see when someone else is in pain, the parts of the brain in women light up more that mimic or sense the pain of others. So women in general, they feel it more, and they felt it more since they were kids. And because of that, if we're hurt or someone else is hurt, we want to protect them, we want to protect ourselves. So we actually internalize that more. So because we feel it more, we want to protect everyone from having pain. And so that's often why we end up feeling guilty, or we want to please others, is because we don't want them to be hurt, whether it's emotionally or physically or whatever. And one thing that's interesting that I noticed is when I was watching a movie with my husband, and there was a scene, you know, these fast movies, sometimes they go really quickly, and you're trying to, you know, pick up the pieces. And I remember telling my husband, we need to stop and rewind because I didn't understand, I'm a bit slow. And he said, no, they complicated it on purpose. It's not clear. It'll become clear later. And he just dismissed it. And that is a sheer example of the difference between men and women, because often women will blame themselves or say, oh, I'm slow, I didn't get it. Where men will be like, it's not me, it's them, and I'm not even gonna worry about it. And so you can kind of see the difference in just that example. So we definitely internalize that self-criticism more. Unreasonable expectations. So we hold ourselves to really high standards every day. And this is not only women, this is also men. But generally we have these super high standards, and then we are so hard on ourselves when we don't meet them, and we forget that we are human and we're not perfect. So Brene Brown, actually, she mentioned that there is, when someone tries something new for the first time, they are really forgiving because they know that it's not going to be easy. But then the high standards actually become a problem when we expect something to be easier than it actually is. So, and she says, we feel these mark our ineptitude rather than an understandable lengthy journey. So it's completely unreasonable to think that every day we're going to be as productive as we were that one day that we were just, you know, we had this great, amazing, productive day. It's not only about productivity, it's about anything, but we expect everything to be perfect every day, and it's hard to get there. So it's actually, what Brene Brown calls it, is outrageous and unrealistic to actually think that. Perfectionism. So this one is where we actually feel that we need to be perfect or to please others. And this is different than excellence. And a lot of times these seem to be fused, but perfectionism is not the same as excellence. So excellence is striving to be the best you can be, whereas perfectionism is excellence plus the heavy weight of worrying about what other people think, worrying about being attacked, criticized, worrying about disappointing, just trying to be perfect. And Brahman, you're on mute. I don't know if, I didn't know if you were trying to say something. Okay. So be perfect so that you're not criticized. And that's really the difference. So we just need to understand when we are really trying to be excellent at something and be the best we can be versus when we're worried about what other people think. This is interesting. So women are often people pleasers. And there was a study of a group of boys versus girls. They were given lemonade, but the lemonade was salty and it wasn't sweet. And the boys boys, immediately, as soon as they took that sip, they said, "Oh, this is disgusting. I don't want to have this. This is gross." They had all these comments. They didn't drink it. The girls politely sipped it. And when the researchers asked the girls why they didn't say anything and why they continued to drink it, they said they didn't want the researchers to feel bad. And that's a conditioning from childhood. It's somewhat innate because we do empathize more, but it just goes to show that, and it's also conditioned, society conditions that even more, or cultivates that even more, because boys are taught to be brave and girls are taught to kind of go along and be polite. And that's kind of, we keep going down that path, and it ends up inhibiting us in some way, shape, or form. So it leads to, it's limiting, that perfection, it's limiting, it leads to suffocation. So it's not really the healthiest way to be. So striving to be the best you can be is much better than perfectionism. So it's important to notice when you're trying to be perfect versus when you're trying to be excellent. And I used to have this issue with perfectionism, and I've really relaxed over the years in trying to be aware of this and to not really worry about what others think, but to be the best I can be because I want to, not because what anyone else is going to think. Okay, so now on to guilt from others. Anytime others make us feel guilty, either knowingly or unknowingly, it leads us to feel depleted, completely depleted, resentful, and largely with unmet needs. And oftentimes, if we have unmet needs, then we're going to ask others to fulfill those needs in ways that aren't healthy as well. So if you think about, if you've got guilt coming from your parents, they had it from their parents, and it just keeps getting passed on. And it's just because that's the conditioning that we have. So we need to release it from ourselves and from others, and then everyone starts being a little bit more self-sufficient. It doesn't mean that everyone is on their own and independent and no one needs anyone else. I mean, there's unity, there's love, there's connection, there's all these great things, but guilt is not necessarily the healthiest way to do that. So question here, have you intentionally or unintentionally made others feel guilty? So just take a moment to reflect anytime you say things to someone, it actually could add to their guilt. And again, this is not to make you feel more guilty, it's just to make you aware. Okay. Guilt often means that you care. So oftentimes when even, let's say we say something for someone to elicit some guilt, it's because we want them to learn, or we want to protect ourselves, or we want to protect them. So there's usually some love or care involved for the most part, but it really just depends on the situation. It's powerful, but it's not very useful. This emotion is actually, can be detrimental. It actually causes you to struggle more, and it is a form of self-punishment. So this is, maybe for a quick second, it's good for someone to have a little bit of remorse if they've actually done something harmful. It doesn't even have to be a little bit, but some remorse. But it doesn't mean that they should carry it with them forever. And it also doesn't mean it should be at the high intensity that often women carry guilt have. So what we want to do is become free of this, and here's how to do it. And I just want to check, are there any questions or anything yet, or shall I continue?
I think I'm going to let you continue, Lindsay, and then we can take them at the end. It might be a bit easier.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so now let's talk about releasing guilt. There are three main ways to release, and the first step is awareness. And we've talked about a few of examples of how you can be more aware, but I'll come to a little bit more in a bit. We want to align our actions to our values, and I'll talk a few ways to support that, which are these items here. I'll come back to it. And having compassion for ourselves, from others, and having forgiveness and having grace. Okay, so first is we want to bring awareness to each emotion. We really, in order to feel something, you want to understand it. You actually, in your mind, if something is happening, you say, that's guilt, I'm feeling guilty. Once you recognize it, it actually softens it a little bit. But when you don't know what it is, or you don't know how to channel it, then it becomes quite heavy. So this is quite important to just bring that awareness. Oops, I missed the slide. To just bring that awareness and to acknowledge and to accept the feeling that you have. And know that each emotion that you have comes with a lesson. So we should not feel guilty for feeling angry. We should not feel guilty for feeling guilty. All these feelings that we have are appropriate. And so acknowledging it and accepting it and knowing that it comes with a lesson is one of the key things that if you keep in mind, it actually helps you release it quicker. So that's awareness. Now we're going to talk about aligning actions to values, not only from a personal perspective, but also from a business perspective. So first, listen to your inner voice. And at the beginning, this is not easy because we're so conditioned to go with what society, what our parents, what everyone else wants us to do, behave, or think, that we don't actually listen to our inner voice. So ask God for guidance, really look within and see what your voice is telling you versus the conditioning. If something feels off and you can't put a finger on it yet, that is a sign of something you should open and dig through a little bit more to know that maybe you're not somehow aligning what you're doing in your life to your, to your values. So, I mean, just as a quick example, I was, there was one day last week where my daughter was going to a little activity. It's not school yet. And she was going to an activity and I had work. And I remember having to, like, the idea was the next day I was going to be running to her, get to her activity. And then I was going to skip a break that I had. So I was going full on client sessions without a break. And then I realized, it's just not worth it, because at the expense that I'll have a break just for her to do that activity. And when I told her, I mean, she's going to do the activity other days as well. I told her, her disappointment, she had it. It lasted 30 seconds. So, I mean, she understood and it was over. And I realized, like, I saved a day of being stressed and worried that I'm not going to have a break and how I manage, and just aligning my actions to my values. And that's a simple one, but it goes to show that there's small things that we can do. And we don't always have a choice, but when we do, it makes it a lot easier. Now, from a company perspective, we also need to align actions to our values. So a recent example is the Black Lives Matter movement, especially hitting hard in the US right now. And a lot of companies have proclaimed on social media or other outlets that Black Lives Matter, but no changes, no actions were taken. And it was pointed out by employees that there needs to be obviously some actions taken. So one example of an action that a lot of companies are taking is putting reserving 15% of their shelves for products for companies that are owned by Black people. So they started just aligning, because they say one thing is important, but then they're not aligning. So this is also a time for awareness and reflection of where you have certain values where your actions don't align. And when you combine those, you're gonna be more connected to who you are, to your company persona, and also you are not going to be feeling as guilty for not truly aligning to who you're supposed to be or who your company is. And these are some examples of values. So take a moment or take time later to think about what your values are and where there may be misalignment, because that creates some awareness as well. Okay, so keeping your tank full is something that I've put under aligning your actions to values, because when you want to have full mental clarity, emotional strength, and physical strength, you've got to keep your tank full and also prioritize yourself. So, the famous example, when you're on a plane, if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, you're not going to be able to save other people. So this is not to say be selfish. This is to say prioritize yourself so that you have the full clarity and strength to help others around you. And so we do that with food, with movement. It doesn't necessarily have to be exercise, with stress management, and with sleep. And this is really my forte, my area, to help people to bring up to a level that they feel comfortable with, so they can actually live a healthy and happy life. And there's a lot more obviously under this umbrella, but this is super important that we are doing this, because the more we are prioritizing ourselves, then the more we can give in the right way to others and in a healthy way. Also under this umbrella is getting support. So get the right support that you need. And sometimes it's just having a friend to say, hey, I felt guilty about doing this, or There was shame here, just even calling out the emotions you have, whether you need support. It doesn't have to be about those emotions, but it can be about anything. Make sure you've got friends that are supportive. Ask for feedback. So sometimes, like in the sense of aligning actions to your values, sometimes we're not sure where we may be misaligned. And if you're in a place where you're ready to improve and you're okay with hearing the critique and not gonna, because sometimes we're not in a place to hear that critique yet, and that's okay. But if you're in that place, whether you're a person or a business, just asking for feedback and making sure that the values that you've set forward or that you believe in align with the actions that you've been taking. Accountability. So maybe you just need a friend or someone to make you accountable to, aligning to your actions to your values, or to keeping your tank full, or to being healthy. But it's important to have the support that you need. And lastly, someone with objectivity or expertise can make it easier. I have a lot of people who come to me that no one would ever think that they would want support, even from an emotional freedom perspective. But at the end of the day, the best athletes in the world have coaches. It's always nice to have someone with objectivity in your life. So that's why it's important to just make sure your circle is supportive for you, because there's a lot of people in our family and conditioning that are supportive in certain ways, but not in others. So just make sure that your circle is well-rounded enough. Okay, so we've talked awareness, we've talked aligning actions to your values. Now let's talk compassion. This is super important for ourselves and for others. So if we make a mistake, we need to own it. So if it's clear that it's a mistake, yes, say sorry. But don't say sorry so many times, because I think it's not needed. And I've done it, and I probably still do it as well. Oh, sorry, because we just really don't want to upset anyone. So the moment we've done something, it's, take that responsibility. But once you've made your apology, then it's time to move on, because you can't live in that negative vibration of guilt forever. So that's key. Obviously, if there's no clear mistake, don't say sorry, say thank you. And this often happens with women, and I used to do it as well. I would always be apologetic, even if I didn't do anything wrong, or even if it teetered on the border of being, bothersome or burdensome. I mean, I used to be like, sorry for the long message. And now I just say, thank you for listening, or thank you for having patience for the long message. And on the receiving end, if you actually get thank you for listening versus I'm sorry for the long message, you actually feel different. So it's actually a different vibration to actually appreciate when someone, if there was no mistake, but if there was something that you're not sure about, just to say thank you. And that changes the whole dynamic. Forgiveness. This one, okay, so in order to have self-compassion, we also need to know forgiveness. And forgiveness is a little bit confusing, because I think in the past, forgiveness was only saying, okay, what you did is excusable. And we're not saying it's excusable, and we're not saying it's not wrong. But what we are saying is that we did the best we can with the information we had at the moment. And the way that I like to define it, I couldn't find the best definition. So I've put here compassion that actions, basically anyone's actions or decisions, are motivated by one's experiences, information, feelings, and awareness in that moment. So even 5 minutes later, we may feel differently, but it's important to have that understanding, because once we have that understanding, it explains it. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. So it's more of a healing vibration. It's not punishing. And once we start to understand when we make a mistake or we do something or somebody else does it, we need to just have compassion that that's the set of experiences and feelings and information they had in that moment. And once we understand that, then we can move forward. We can't just live and, beat ourselves up or beat someone else up in our mind for what has happened. So again, on self-compassion, so this one is a messy kitchen. And as an example, when, let's say you're really busy with stuff and then you walk into the kitchen and you realize you forgot to clean the kitchen. Often women will say, they'll be very angry at themselves, and they'll say something like, oh, I'm such an idiot, or something like this, I forgot to clean this up, and they'll just like beat themselves up for forgetting to clean the kitchen. And another way to actually look at this is say, I forgot, I must need a break, And you know what? I'm going to feel a lot better if I clean up the kitchen right now, because it's, it's going to make me feel better. So it's okay to have frustration, but you actually take the same action because you clean the kitchen anyway, but you're not being so angry at yourself, and you're realizing, oh, you know what? I forgot. I must be tired. I must be busy. And it's going to make me feel a lot better to clean up that kitchen. So it doesn't change the action. And in fact, being easy on yourself, it actually doesn't make you self-indulgent or complacent. It actually helps you to be self-supportive. So just notice anytime you're actually, you're doing something and you start talking to yourself in a negative way. Maybe you went the wrong way. You say, oh, I'm an idiot, whatever you say to yourself, because all women have this talk to themselves. So it's really important to notice that and catch it. And you're still going to resolve the problem anyway when you have that self-compassion. So here are some thought patterns that can help you realize in the moment, is this harming me or helping me? So the moment you recognize that it's guilt, then you say, okay, maybe I need to change something. So that's aligning actions to the values. And if it's just that negative feeling that's just not going away, then you ask yourself, I've got 4 thought patterns. There are more that you can probably come up with as well, but is this harming or helping me? So just realizing, okay, this is not actually helping me. It's not doing anything good for me. So just that realization helps you move to the next place. I let this go. Holding on to the past no longer serves me. I'll do better next time. I'll learn from this moving forward. And oftentimes we don't realize we're feeling guilty or feeling shameful or angry or whatever. And so once we understand the emotion that we're feeling, we have a choice. And you can also say, I choose to be hopeful. I choose to be confident, because that's one of the ways where you can actually channel your emotions. Sometimes we need to sit in the emotion for a little bit longer until you're ready to channel it. But if you can, just recognize that you can choose. You have a choice to, like, a guilt is not serving me. In fact, last week I was driving, my daughter was in the car. I got pulled over because I was speeding. And I do have a lead foot, so this is not the first time it happened. And I got pulled over, and then my daughter was asking me a million questions afterwards. She's 4. And, so obviously I'm not hurting anyone else. So there's, it's a little bit of less guilt for me because I'm not, upsetting or disappointing anyone. I mean, I just have to, you have to pay a fine, you have to go somewhere, you have to sit with the ticket, all these things. And then you have to wait forever for the police to write the ticket and talk to you about what you did and but still there's that feeling of guilt, negativity, and like, damn, I shouldn't have done that. And then I was thinking, oh, I'm in the middle of doing this prep for this guilt-free grit. What were the thought patterns? And I had to rack my brain about what these were. And then as soon as I recalled them, then it helped me to move on, because easily it's a conditioning. We are conditioned to sit in that guilt and to sit in that negativity when something happens. So it's important to write these or to come up with a mantra or something that you can do when you're feeling bad to get yourself out of it if you're ready to get out of it. So now just, if you can, take a moment to reflect on when you're hard on yourself and how you can ease it. Okay. So how do we align to our values with grace? So I don't know if you've seen this Friends episode, but I love this example. And so they ask her, hey, Phoebes, do you want to help? And this is not necessarily graceful, but I love this response. And she says, oh, I wish I could, but I don't want to. And I think that's the way in society, if we could get to that place and understand that some people just really don't want to and be okay with that, that is actually the standards that I would love to see. And just, we realize we do what we want for the most part, obviously, but we're not there yet, not even close. And obviously this response wouldn't apply to everything, but I just love this response. So on to gracious communication. Take time and prepare if you can. I mean, sometimes you're not able to prepare for every conversation, but if you need to have a discussion, it's important to prepare. Mel Robbins gave this example of when she was gifted a pool table when she got married, and her dad made it for her. And they had it in their playroom for years and years and years. And then they converted their playroom to an office. And it was just sitting in the middle of the office, not fitting. And she kept it there because her dad comes once or twice a year for a few days, and she didn't want to disappoint him. But she needed to have the discussion with him to let him know that it's no longer serving them in the house, and that she will put it in a storage, and then as soon as she finds a place, she will put it back. So she had to have that discussion, and she knew that she was going to disappoint, but she also needed to, you know, align to her values. So she was direct and kind about it. She took time to prepare what she was going to say. And, you know, one of the points here is understanding and acknowledging the intention. So people may make you feel guilty, and they don't even do it on purpose. I mean, Mel Robbins in that example felt guilty just because she knew her dad would be disappointed otherwise. But understand and acknowledge if people do make you feel guilty, it's out of love. If someone says you're not spending enough time at home, like a parent would say something like that, they say it because they miss you, because they want to see you, because they love you. A lot of times people, even parents, want children to feel guilty because they want them to learn their lesson. So it's a form of self-protection, and even protecting themselves from having it happen again. So if sometimes you're reminded of a mistake, it really, the intention most of the time is positive. Address the elephant in the room. So this is really important. You know, my husband and I were walking not too long ago, and at the end of our discussion, he made some comment that he was saying, well, I didn't get a chance to tell you because you were talking and talking and talking. And then obviously that comment I felt guilty about in that moment. But at the same time, I also told him, hey, you know what? I understand, and I'll try to be more aware that you actually need more space to talk. So that's something I should be aware of. However, for me, what works best in the elephant in the room is not to make the side comment after the fact so that I feel guilty. It's to say, hey, up front, like, I want to talk about these things. Or if I happen to not be aware and talking and talking and talking, that he interrupts me and says, hey, before we finish, I need to have this call. So we had this discussion, and then he was fine. And now I think he knows that not to wait till the end and make me feel guilty. It's at the end. And only as I was starting to prepare for this discussion on guilt, some of these things I became more aware that they're happening in my world every day. And so this hopefully will instill some more awareness on your part, for all of you women, to have that awareness and to start addressing the elephants in the room. Stick to the facts without over-explaining, blaming, or becoming defensive. That's key. Stick to your values and remind yourself of why you're actually, aligning to your values or, setting boundaries. So when guilt resurfaces, reconnect to your own reasons, align to your values, you're setting boundaries, you're reducing your stress and resentment, increasing self-worth, and strengthening relationships. Whatever your reasons are, remind yourself, because in the moment in a discussion, you may forget that and you may start to feel guilty for all of this or for setting boundaries. So have that self-compassion and remind yourself why. And even if they don't change, you can change your reaction and let it affect you less. So guilt only works if you allow it. So that's key here. Okay. Essentially, your boundaries are your way of telling people how you want to be treated. As you become more skilled at setting boundaries, you'll find a huge shift on how people treat you. So it's like a muscle. It is practice. And the first time, let's say you're setting boundaries with someone who's not used to it, as I mentioned, don't become defensive, because they're not used to you setting your boundaries if you're starting for the first time. So it's important to ease into it and practice. The more you do it, the more they'll understand where the boundaries are. So that's key. So just in summary, releasing guilt, become more aware, you align your actions to your values, you keep your tank full, make sure you can prioritize yourself as well so you have that clarity and strength to move forward, get the support you need, make sure you are compassionate with yourself and with others, have forgiveness and that understanding that whatever happens happened because of the circumstances in that moment, and have that gracious communication. So now, before we go for questions, I just want everyone to look at this wheel. These are kind of different areas of our life. And as you can see, they're all different areas that we can probably improve in some way, shape, or form. Just take a moment and see, and probably I would actually start with health and fitness as an example. And if maybe we just take a couple moments, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, to think about where you may feel guilty in that area in health and fitness, and where you feel guilty yourself, where it's coming from others, and where you're actually avoiding doing certain things in order to make, like, in order for avoiding for people to feel bad. And so that's really key, is understanding where the guilt is coming from, aligning actions to your values, and how you can have more self-compassion. So kind of go through this exercise, and it's not always easy to do it on your own, but let's try. And if anyone has any ahas or anything like that, we can share it at the end. So I'll just give you a minute. Okay. Should we open up and see if there are any questions or any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I think if anybody wants to ask a question, hopefully most of us are going to be proficient on this. There's a little app, there's a little tiny hand, looks like a waving hand. If you can just pop that up so that I can just unmute you and allow you to speak, if that's okay. So if you can just pop up a hand if you've got any questions. I think, Lindsay, just maybe to kick off, and obviously the time I've spent with you, which is, I've been very fortunate to have done so. And I just had one of the participants message me to say she's coming to Mauritius to stay with me so she can have sessions with you. So obviously she really enjoyed the discussion. So I think, from that perspective, I think what you've said today is actually amazing. And it's a lot of the work I've done with you personally, but I think just picking up on some of the things, and some of the things I've worked with you and personally through, is I think Lindsay picked up on really just changing the vocab, so changing the words that you use. And I think that's really been important. And I remember going to Lindsay one day and saying, I have no other words, but I feel drained. And, what her and I did is that we then reworked on what actually we could say instead of saying drained. And just really changing the vocab. And if I align that to business, everybody in the entire world is going through a shift in their business where they're having to look at costs and people, and really looking at a business and a business built to last. And we call it a grit built to last, and that's our business. But so instead of using the word cost cutting, I was telling Lindsay, because cutting is such a harsh word, and we worked with some amazing business consultants at the time, we used a concept called cost consciousness. And that cost consciousness word has become a way of life. And I was just laughing with Lindsay because we had a board meeting, and one of the board members sat up and said, have you spoken to the auditors? They must become a lot more cost conscious, and they must look at our fees. And it was so nice that when you start sharing beautiful vibrational words and positive words, they become a way of life, and you start talking to them, and you start, you have an impact on others. So for me, the vocab, Lindsay, just to reiterate that to the participants, what you taught me is changing that vocab. And then just a final point, and I'll take questions, is the gracious communication. So Lindsay taught me the mechanisms of preparation and graciously communicating, even when you are going into some of the most hostile conversations you can go into. And that's not necessarily just from a business perspective, but a personal perspective. So the preparation becomes so important, and the gracious communications, it's sending people, negative people, off with love, which was such a weird concept to me in the beginning, which is something that I have learned through my work with Lindsay, this concept of actually sending people off with love. And it's a very unusual term, but that's really around really just neutralizing and changing the environment when you go into some very tough discussions. So I think, Lindsay, I really thought your presentation was amazing, and I'm sorry everybody else doesn't get to spend the time that I spent with you over the last 3 months, because what Lindsay has said, there's so much more behind this, and somebody's just asked if we will share the slides, and I'm sure we will absolutely be able to share the slides. So for me, really, I think it will be fantastic. You know, we'll take some questions, and obviously Lindsay, you can all reach out to her personally, but really it's been an amazing time to share with you during what we've seen as a phenomenon in this world. And Lindsay is very well adversed and very well studied, and has some amazing principles she shares, and she follows some business leaders. So it's really made an amazing interactive process. And I think one of my sort of mindful practices is about community. It's about surrounding yourself with people that you add value to and they add value to you, where you can have these beautiful discussions about beautiful things, where you can debate and discuss things that are not necessary. We always joke, maybe the cricket score. I mean, I know we're women, but whatever, we just align it to men or whatever else. But we actually talk about real stuff, and we share real ideas and real principles. So the extraordinary thing about aligning yourself with a beautiful community is amazing, and Lindsay's been part of that for me. So if I can just ask you to raise your hands, and then I'm going to bring you forward. I might just ask Sandrini, who's sitting next to me, pointing at me, and please, this is the first time I'm doing this. So I think the first one that came up was Natasha Weber. So I'm going to just say allowed to talk, and let's hope this works. And Natasha, if I can just ask you to ask your question to Lindsay, and we can take it from there. So I'll be using you as the guinea pig. So let's do this first. Okay, Natasha.
Hello, ladies.
Perfect, Natasha.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I wanted to say big thanks for bringing up the subject. I think it's important to talk about it now because it's a big time of change for all of us. It's a period of reevaluation and rethinking. And what I have taken on board with me post-quarantine and that I want to develop further going ahead is the word care. And that word for me will englobe all the spheres of my life. Care for myself first, because you have to put on your oxygen mask first before helping others. It's care for your colleagues. It's care for your loved ones. It's caring for your partners as well. It's caring for your business. You were talking about cost cutting or cost conscious, but this word helped me to build my way forward. And I think that's a lovely concept. I think we all need some looking after time for all of us to find the best way to move ahead, to give to ourselves.
I think we lost you. We got most of it, but I think you obviously went off now. Lindsay, I don't know if you've got any comments.
Well, I think that word actually sums up pretty well. I mean, if you have care for yourself and for others, you're generally going to align to a lot of this. As long as you have, those right boundaries of how you care, then I think it makes a lot of sense. So it's a good word to align to.
So I think maybe just Lindsay, just obviously to wrap up and just really to try and end this on a note as amazing as how you've presented what you have today. I think, just for me, the other aspect, Lindsay, and maybe I can ask you to comment on this, because it's something you and I have worked on, is this concept of positive vibrations. And it's around really having these vibrations. And I think, feelings like guilt and shame and that actually they dull your vibration. And the positive vibration and having a mother, a work colleague, a spouse, a partner, a friend who's got a very high vibration around things adds so much value to the world that we find ourselves in. And I've had this concept of you get put on this earth not to be a consumer but to be a creator. And it's something I've always shared with my team, is that it's not just about taking, it's about what we can give back as well. And we've done some beautiful initiatives as a team, and Lindsay, I've shared those with you. But even, you know, just to share a little story around one of our staff members, little boy is getting really sick and was diagnosed, unfortunately, with leukemia about a week and a half ago, and a close friend of mine. And the ability to see people, and I called these people her Mauritian army, and she refers to her Mauritian army, the importance of seeing people with such high vibration in a time when things were so difficult, who really became angels on earth, lifting her up and her husband and her family back to the UK for the treatment. So maybe, Lindsay, if I can just ask you, on just because it's so important to me and has worked so beautifully with me, and just reminding myself all the time about this vibrational level, just to give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everything that we do kind of basically has an energy, and there is science behind this. It's quantum physics, but and they would measure people that are, you know, at different vibrations. For example, if someone has a cold, they have a little bit lower vibration. If someone has cancer, even lower. If they're not alive, there's no vibration. And if they have different levels of emotions, they're at different vibrations. So shame is one of the lowest vibrations you can have. Guilt is just after, then apathy, then fear, then anger. I think we're anger, then fear. I can't remember exactly, but you know, it feels sometimes a release to feel angry rather than feeling upset. You feel a little bit better when you can release your frustration. Now, if you're comparing anger to being happy, obviously happiness is higher than that. So there's all these levels of emotions that we can have. And the more we can kind of get up that ladder and stay on a better place, the more we can actually impact the world. But oftentimes, and I was at this place at one point where, you know, I was just struggling myself to keep myself happy. So it's hard to really focus on helping everyone else when you're not in the right vibration. So that's where self-care comes in first, and prioritizing yourself. And that's why I mentioned those 4 pillars, you know, just getting proper sleep, managing stress, getting proper nutrition and movement can help you to feel at least normal, so that you can actually move up that ladder, that vibrational ladder, and feel better. But it's so important, because once you move up, then you can start to impact others. And then there's like reason, where Einstein was. And then there's, you know, enlightenment, where Buddha was. So you can get to these higher vibrations. And I see this as a progression. And the beautiful thing is, in life now, in this generation and in society, we're at a turning point, because there's a lot more awareness than there ever was. If you think back a few generations ago, our grandparents or great grandparents, I mean, they were part of the silent generation, so you just don't say anything. And now we're more aware of our feelings. We can kind of align to them more. We can do what we want. Women have more power. There's such a beautiful time right now, and just to harness that, then you can move up that vibrational ladder and really help others to be in a better place. So I think the whole world is shifting. It just looks like it's a big mess right now sometimes, but there's a contraction before the expansion, and people are moving up that vibrational ladder as well. So there's so much more to say on that, but that's all I'll say for now. And then I just want to cover this slide if I can. I love this quote by Alicia Keys, because she says, "When I hear don't sell your soul, not financial," she thinks spiritually, "there is a wealth and a richness you have by protecting the beauty of who you are, your sanity, your wellness, and the specialness of who you are. Each of us are special in a beautiful kind of way. So we're all unique, and it's harnessing that, it's releasing those chains of feeling guilty, you know, so we can have that complete freedom in our life, and then, you know, be at the high vibration." So I just wanted to thank you so much for that. And of course, if anyone has any feedback, please do, you know, feel free to email me. I've got my email just below, and I will send the slides. I'll probably just send, you know, quick info. I'll send the slides and then quick info about me as well. I'll send that to Sandrini, and then she can send it out to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. And I think thank you to everybody for joining today. I was just reading some of the comments, and I do chuckle, because in true fashion as women, we're trying to listen to this beautiful presentation, but get a board pack out at the same time. And that's why they've said, please share the slides, so that they can, and also they've asked for the recording. So I think it is amazing. And really, I'm very excited that we chose to do this. And again, it's been such a unique webinar. And I think for me personally, and I just want to reiterate, just to the attendees today, that slide that Lindsay showed around those 4 areas, and keeping your tank full. You know, without your health, you have nothing. You can be nothing to anybody. Without your mental sanity, you can be nothing to anybody. So those 4 pillars for me are so critical, and I've gone through such a journey, but every day I have to work on those. It doesn't just come naturally. So Lindsay, thank you. And really, I'm glad I got to share my couple of months with the ladies here. And I know I'm going to continue even though I'm finished with Lindsay, I've said I'm not ready to be finished yet. So I think you always need that person, that independent person that can be our sounding board. And what Lindsay said was so true. And you need to reach out to those people in your life, because, and I love that quote at the end, because that beauty within and the beauty that we all have is so extraordinary. When you can start seeing that beauty in each other and ourselves, it's the most amazing place to be. So thanks, Lindsay. We really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Bronwyn. And thank you to all you ladies who listened in. I hope you got some value out of it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye.